Hello, and welcome to the webinar, Supply Spend Management in a Multi-ERP Environment, part of TAKE's new webinar series, Optimizing Supply Chains in a Global and Mobile Economy. My name is Donna Fritz, and I am the Director of Product Marketing for TAKE Supply Chain Solutions. Joining us on the presentation today are TAKE Senior Directory of Industry Solutions, G. Satish, and TAKE Senior Solutions Architect, John Kelser. Before we get started, I'd like to take a few moments to cover some housekeeping items, which you can see on the screen. All the attendees will be on mute. You can submit any questions through the Q&A panel on the right of your screen, or you can email questions to contact@takesolutions.com. If you have any technical difficulties during the presentation, you can contact WebEx customer support at 1-866-229-3239 and select option 1. This session will be recorded and an on-demand version will be made available by next week. For more information, please chat with the host. Thank you for joining this broadcast, which will last approximately 35 minutes. Today, Satish and John will be discussing the multi-ERP challenge in the M&A world, how to create a connected enterprise in a disconnected business, the impact of shared services, and Satish will share information about a real-world implementation. At the conclusion of the presentation, John and Satish will be available to respond to any questions you may have. We'll answer questions in the order received, and we'll stay on the line for approximately 10 minutes after the end of the presentation. We will also be administering a very short survey right after today's presentation, which will take about a minute to complete and help us to present additional topics of interest to you in the future. At this point, I'll turn the presentation over to Satish.
Thank you, Donna, and again, welcome everyone. I want to start with the basics first. What is the multi-ERP challenge and where does it come from? It's not like businesses like to invite pain by actually implementing several ERPs at the same time, though that is not as uncommon as you'd like to think. In most cases, market conditions dictate that businesses come together, two or more of them, and sometimes several more of them come together. And when they do, and once the ink is dry and the press releases are done, the reality of what needs to be accomplished comes into play. Several enterprise systems, not just ERPs, mind you, you need to factor in warehouse management systems, MES, financial accounting, payroll, etc. Add to this varying business processes, supplier selection criteria, and finally, that's how we've always done business here. You factor all of that in. That leads us to the big challenge that the press releases talked about. They always refer to economies of scale and efficiency gains from shared services and consolidation. You really have two mutually conflicting factors here: multiple systems versus the need to consolidate immediately, or at least before the next quarterly reports are due. Now, let's talk for a few minutes about the actual enterprise environment, the business process complexity, and the issue of multiple suppliers and part numbers. And usually when we encounter this kind of a complex situation, we call on John Kelser to take charge. So, John?
Thanks, Satish. This is a very busy slide. It illustrates actually a rather simplified example of the relationships among several divisions and the suppliers of an organization or company. You can see there's a mix of sole source suppliers as well as suppliers that support several divisions. In case where there's several divisions for using the same supplier, this can lead to conflicting priorities, conflicting terms and conditions, labeling requirements, pricing, you name it. And as a new division is added, you're only going to increase the level of complexity. This twin issues of conflicting priorities and pricing tend to be the key drivers for most organizations in an attempt to do some form of consolidation of information about their supply base. As you can see, the data needed for this activity is in multiple systems on the left-hand side. It needs to be gathered, cross-referenced, and analyzed. Company-wide decisions, as a result, wind up being done by spreadsheet and take a long time to implement. When a new division is added or removed, this analysis needs to be revised, but unfortunately it is not uncommon that it is not because of all the other things that are going on when a new division is added. Kind of the same thing occurs when you have a divestiture. This tends to be a spreadsheet activity, and it tends to be prone to delays. Now, you may have noticed supplier F sitting there on that right-hand side. Although the organization, an organization may have tens of thousands of suppliers, they may really only be using a far smaller number. The maintenance of the supplier's data may still be occurring even though the suppliers aren't being used. In this type of environment, it is not uncommon for it to be incredibly difficult to ask a very simple question: how much did we spend with each supplier? This is a difficult question if you don't have that data all in one place. Next slide, please. So, what do CFOs, CPOs want? Well, in a nutshell, they want to lower what we call the TCBU, which is the cost of being us. In reality, it's lowering the cost to effectively raise your EBITDA. I can never get those letters to come out in the correct order. But in a nutshell, there are a bunch of different levers that can be pushed to lower cost. However, all of them can fall under a heading of compliance. The compliance provides a framework to enable savings and provide an organization confidence that its processes and data are consistently known, understood, and being utilized. Procurement efficiencies can address a wide range of savings from something very overlooked, which is the internal cost of processing a PO, to the savings reaped from volume purchasing agreements. When an organization has a consistent procurement process across all divisions, the option of a shared services model for procurement or AP becomes a reality. Additionally, multi-site receiving is in here. This may seem to be a little bit subtle or below the radar savings, but there are a lot of internal improvements that can occur by proper materials identification and receiving. If you have your supply base providing the correct information for you to do your receipts, it can occur in minutes as opposed to hours. Okay, big deal. Our general response to ask is that to ask the question, what's a day's worth of inventory worth to you? Would you rather be using that capital some other way? And I'll also ask, how many day dollars of outstanding AP invoice mismatch errors do you have? Do you have commercial terms that can be used in capture? All of a sudden, this payload of data coming from the suppliers becomes much more important and allows you to reap some additional savings. And one other small way that savings can be gained from this is if you have a streamlined receiving process, you can start taking advantage of doing line-side deliveries, which reduce the need for warehouse space. All of these things begin to combine into a larger and larger bucket of money that can be saved. Lastly, the blessing and curse of ERP systems is that they generate lots and lots of data. However, lots of data is meaningless. Data that's organized as a BI tool, that's meaningful. Again, the consistency that proper compliance provides gives your data its context, and it allows BI tools to be used and used well. We'll go into this in more detail a little bit later on. Now, how do you get from here to there? There are many ways to inject compliance into an organization. You've got emails, you've got books and manuals and how-to manuals and all sorts of things that you can use. However, the most common approach to try to organize all of these various systems into one is to consolidate them into one ERP system. This would be a large-scale approach of taking all the various ERPs and bringing them into one. This is the IT version of a shared services option, and there's some very, very good reasons to do it. The ability to make compliance changes across an organization is much, much easier. The data in the system is generally understood, it's in context, and it can be used and can be accessed. There's also a single source for the information when you need to interrogate and performing analysis. Well, what's not to like? Well, there's a few things that are problematic with this approach. The first is it is expensive, and I'm not just talking about the cost of an implementation. There's also the internal change management. older ERPs, and particularly homegrown systems, tend to be tailored for an individual division. In a sense, these systems are really built for the way they work, and that may, in fact, be some of the reasons that they have the efficiency that why they are profitable today, which is the reason that you bought them. One second here. I'm having a little technical difficulty. There we go. Now, when you move these organizations into a new system, essentially they can be taking a step backwards in terms of the efficiency and how they do business. This is often lost as a result of the sake of the common good of that single system for the company. Additionally, financial controls from one system may not apply to the new system. These controls tend to reach down into the work instructions as well as organizational hierarchies. I don't know if you've ever been through one of these things and been around to see the aftermath. It is amazing how a procedural change decided in a conference room as part of an implementation tend to be addressed in some rather curious ways out on the warehouse or manufacturing floor. Additionally, these projects can take a very, very long time. Unfortunately, as he said, multi-year timelines are not uncommon. And lastly, one of the other things you need to consider is that once you have a division integrated, spinning them off, if need be, for another merger and acquisition can become complicated, or you're overburdening them with an IT infrastructure that they simply cannot support. With that, I'm going to hand it back over to Satish to talk about the second option.
Thank you, John. So, like John said, while the migration to a common ERP system is a familiar approach that many of us have lived through, there are three key issues to keep in mind. I think the first is the costs and timelines accomplishing with this one ERP for all model is substantial. A 5 to 10 year program is not unusual for large companies, and the question is, what do the businesses do in the meantime for consolidation and efficiency gains? The second factor is that in an environment of rapid acquisitions and divestitures, many companies would like to have a more flexible approach, a sort of plug-and-play model that will essentially enable that kind of a rapid mode of acquisitions and divestitures. And finally, and this is really a key factor in many cases, a one-size-fits-all ERP approach just does not work. The very reason for an acquisition, the fact that a profitable division has some unique business processes that make them profitable, that make them valuable to the business, that is lost when the business processes are lost or consolidated under a single umbrella. So all of that leads us to the second approach, a common platform, a sort of enterprise framework that multiple businesses and their ERPs can plug into. This approach really, you have a degree of local business processes that are maintained as desired, but also have the ability to impose corporate controls and workflows as needed. The consolidation of suppliers, spend management, etc., become that much more easier when transactions flow through a common platform. And finally, your suppliers really need to have a single, efficient, unified means of interacting with you, irrespective of the originating business, the back-end system, or the ERP. We'll see some specific examples and benefits of these as we go into some customer cases further down. It's back to you, John.
Sure. You can't tell this is my favorite slide. Okay, to clean this up, the first thing that we need to do is connect all of the division's ERPs into a collaborative platform. This can be done either in a big bang approach or as a measured step-by-step approach. The second step is that those connections connect into a collaborative platform. These connections are, there's a wide variety of options, and they are tailored for each individual ERP and each individual division as needed. Each connection, if you think about it, is a snowflake on the ERP side, but is common interface on the collaboration platform side. This connection platform is built on a messaging engine, so each bidirectional data exchange is tracked and logged. We have connections to the major ERP vendors such as SAP, Oracle, JDE. We can also support web services, API calls, FTP, a myriad of different connection options. The collaborative platform in the middle provides a framework to begin to tackle some of these savings. It's common data structure coupled with a workflow engine that are designed to manage a supply chain is at the heart of this platform. The workflows control the messages between the ERPs and the suppliers, and you control the workflows. These flows are how you inject compliance both internally and externally. An organization can ease into the collaboration platform due to its modular approach. If you just want to get a handle on your supply base and reduce the AP invoice days outstanding, you can implement just the modules you need. This differs from that initial option one that we're talking about by allowing you to tailor the scope of your change management. Finally, there are multiple options for the supply base to connect. A web portal allows less sophisticated suppliers easy access to all the demand across all the divisions. High-volume suppliers may, in fact, opt for a more integrated approach. We support both of them. Again, this platform allows you to tailor the needs of the few while providing a common data and process structure for the entire organization. Now, the key takeaways from this thing that I'd like you to remember is that the system provides flexibility on how you onboard both your suppliers and your divisions. The plug-and-play model, sort of a plug-and-save model, which is a little cheesy, but it does emphasize the point that as you decide that you want to reach for more savings, you can bring on a module that will help you bring those savings to fruition. For each ERP, this allows you to ramp up and keep your business running at the same time. The old adage, being able to change the tires while the car is running. The capacity of a shared services model for each one of these, for each one of the ERPs becomes a clear and achievable goal as you're doing your onboarding. The gains alone from spending analytics achieved because you have a common data platform allow you to understand and make strategic decisions. However, since the data is available to you in real time, you can monitor the impact of these decisions and quickly and accurately understand and make adjustments as needed. All the compliance and validations we have discussed not only improve your efficiency, but the messaging for this platform provides auditing capabilities. Now, I want to dig in a little bit deeper into the collaboration platform's common data. On the left-hand side, we discussed the connections to the ERPs. The center section is where the common data and workflow engine are housed and managed. This is where you control and monitor what's going on. The supplier and part number mappings between divisions are managed here. The history of each PO and revision and shipment from your suppliers are also stored. These are synchronized with the back-end ERPs within the correct division. Workflows can be applied to messages coming in from both suppliers and from the division ERPs. Approval workflows for higher-level spending could, for example, be managed in this system. There's also where divisions can gain visibility into long-term or volume pricing agreements that are already in place from other divisions. Another flexibility of this system is that it can become a central requisition system and upon approval can generate the purchase orders in the correct ERP of the requesting division. During an acquisition, the same integration approach occurs. Once an ERP is integrated, the same workflows can be applied or tailored as needed. And in the case of a divestiture, the new company continues to use the ERP they already have in place and work with the suppliers using the same platform. The workflows in place can be migrated over to the new company and then tailored as needed. The security built into the system is going to restrict any further access to the parent company's data. There's a lot of flexibility and capability in the system. The question is, which ones will generate savings for you? Now, I want to give you a couple of real-world examples. Let me hand it back over to Satish.
Thank you, John. So what we have here is an example from one of our customers who have a Tier 2 or a Tier 3 ERP system on the left. Essentially 4 types of procurement, which many of you are familiar with: direct, indirect, subcontract, and outside processing. Up on top, we have a range of external databases, including a completely different corporate Tier 1 ERP, and some other external reference points and databases. The challenges include the now familiar theme of the need to consolidate spend across, across these divisions that have different ERP systems, the need to put in place a kind of shared service, but they also had an interesting challenge of needing to measure up to corporate efficiency metrics like number of procurement employees to spend value, as well as measurements about excess inventory at the end of each year. Further, they also needed to have a streamlined RFQ and quote process that was not adequately supported by either enterprise system. They implemented the Take One SCM system that integrated with their back-end systems as well as connected to the corporate and external systems, and that's the box you see in the middle. And a range of functionality that come with it, like catalog check and PO, auto build, etc. As we click through the system, when a PR is created, it automatically checks against corporate long-term agreements, the approved vendor list, purchase history on both the local ERP system as well as the corporate ERP system. And if they are able to find a match for an approved vendor on a supplier catalog that can actually support that particular item, then it actually auto-builds a purchase order. This, to those of you familiar with the term, is what you might call, lights-out procurement or touchless procurement. If there is no match found, then it goes through a standard RFQ process based on PO history, within the organization, and it starts off by sending RFQs to the suppliers, gets back responses from the suppliers, builds purchase orders based on awarded POs, sends out purchase orders, gets back acknowledgments. And once the procurement process is streamlined, this customer also opted to share forecast and planning data with suppliers to support move-ins and move-outs based on MRP runs. Now, the net result was a reduction in excess inventory, primarily because of rapid non-fax, non-email collaboration with suppliers and a high degree of compliance with corporate spend policies, etc. They were able to implement approval routings for different kinds of capital purchases as well as regular commodity purchases or program-driven purchases and so on. And overall, a gentle move towards achievement of efficiency goals. What I also want to point out is that this is a system that can be used by two completely different entities. So this particular example I talked about, there is a corporate entity that owns a division, but this can be two completely different companies, two completely different businesses, and it would still work equally well. So let me, for example, take an out-of-the-world example. So let's say this is NASA negotiates a terrific deal to supply computer equipment, and someone like the EPA wants to leverage that contract. This environment would equally well function. So what I'm trying to say is that two completely different entities can actually have a combined supplier base and can actually negotiate, common procurement terms. One other factor here is that it is also interesting that this customer continues to use this collaborative environment as a part of their migration plan to a corporate Tier 1 ERP system. What we'll see over the next few slides is we'll look at some of the types of metrics our customers are able to implement once this type of a collaborative environment is achieved. So once the common platform is set, all transactions flow through a common environment, it is possible to put in place dashboards like these. If you cannot measure it, you cannot improve it, as Lord Kelvin said, if you'll pardon my digression to high school physics. But this dashboard essentially gives you a high-level snapshot of the overall procurement and supplier performance of the entire company across all divisions and locations. The drill downs on the right and left allow you to go to specific suppliers, locations, plants, functions. For instance, one of the most common internal measures I've seen being used with a number of our customers is the requisition to PO turnaround. And this is fairly easily measured for the entire corporation or for a specific division, plant, or commodity. It also provides a wealth of information when determining where the focus needs to be to gain additional efficiencies. John talked earlier about what CFOs and CPOs want, and this truly is one of the most commonly used dashboards we've seen. Other applications include year-to-date spend for a given project or program against budget. And this is especially important in a project or program-based business where production happens around the world against a specific program, and it is necessary to monitor the overall costs and budgets. This is another example, again, of monitoring performance across the organization with appropriate drill downs. Again, we talked about distributed deliveries and receipts fairly early on in this presentation, and this actually allows you to monitor performance in specific locations by supplier or commodity by location, etc. Finally, scorecarding is one of the most common requirements we see in multi-ERP environments, especially when there is a need to quantify the improvements to be made or where there exists room for improvement. You could also make this a self-service dashboard available to suppliers where they can monitor their own performance. In that kind of a scenario, you're not only monitoring performance, you're also providing the suppliers an opportunity to understand where they stand with the performance metrics, and essentially with greater transparency, you can enable greater improvements. This would actually take a collaborative approach even further. One interesting variation of scorecarding we've seen is target setting. Again, you have the option of sharing this with your users, your suppliers, and enabling a more participative, collaborative approach to process improvements. Before we move forward, this essentially completes the core of the presentation, but one observation I would like to share is that supply chain efficiencies are rarely an isolated event. You really cannot have pockets of efficiencies while ignoring the rest of all the other processes, and these processes span internal users across the company as well as external supply chain partners like suppliers and 3PLs. A common platform enables bringing together all these disparate entities together with minimal disruption to existing processes and systems. With that, I really have just a few additional words about Take Solutions. We've been in business over 14 years and count several large and small organizations as long-term and loyal customers. We have a global as well as local presence wherever our customers do business, and our focus has been in the supply chain and related areas such as material movement and tracking, barcoding, compliance, labeling, and RFID. With that, I'm going to turn this over back to you, Donna.
Thank you, Satish and John, for a great presentation. You did a good job outlining the challenges of managing supply spend in a multi-ERP environment and how tackling the problem requires an enterprise view, but it doesn't have to mean new, lengthy, and expensive ERP implementations. It can be accomplished with a strong application-to-application connection platform and spend analytics that together can consolidate data from various existing systems into actionable information. As I mentioned before, Satish and John will now be available online for the next 10 or so minutes to answer any questions you may have. Just submit your question using the Q&A box. We've also provided our phone number and email addresses on the screen for any questions you may have after the close of our presentation today, or perhaps you might have suggestions for topics for future webinars. We'd love to hear from you. As a reminder, a recorded version of this presentation will be available on demand via our website at takesolutions.com by next week. And it looks like we already have a couple of great questions. Satish, this question sounds like it's for you. Which ERPs do you integrate with? We have some Tier 2 ERPs, and I'm wondering if you can connect with them. We're also considering migrating to a Tier 1 ERP. Would your solution work with them?
That's a great question, Donna. We've integrated with several enterprise systems over the years, including those that used to be Tier 2 and are now Tier 1, and many that are vice versa too. The type of ERP typically has not been a limitation for us. We would simply work with your IT team, and they will tell you fairly quickly how we can actually accomplish that integration. We work with some of the usual suspects, SAP, Oracle, PeopleSoft, JD Edwards, and and so on. We've also worked with a number of Tier 2s and Tier 3s, as I said. As for the second part of the question, which really was, if you really have a single ERP system running across the organization, is this solution of any use? And the answer is yes. Once supplier collaboration is achieved, connecting with your new Tier 1 ERP system would be the same as adding or taking out any other ERP system. Several of our customers have always had a single enterprise system running their business, and they continue to derive benefits from the ability to collaborate with multiple suppliers electronically around the world. And essentially, one thing to keep in mind is your suppliers are not affected by whether you have version 1 or version 8 of your ERP, or whether you have 5 different ERPs running the back-end system.
Thanks, Satish. John, this question looks like it's for you. How easy is it for suppliers to integrate with a system like this?
Actually, it's very easy. One of the advantages of using the basic web portal technology, which is very common in the marketplace, to do purchasing collaboration, is that a supplier can get turned on and turned up rather quickly. It is not uncommon for us to bring up a couple of hundred suppliers a week on this system, and that's all done through web-based training and a degree of CBTs. Now, for larger suppliers that want to do an integration, either through some form of traditional EDI or XML, that sort of thing, that is also available. We generally recommend that you start off using the web, and so you can continue to function and then work through the integration process in the background. The mom and pops, smaller suppliers tend to wind up using the system because of its ability to filter and set views of data to essentially manage their processes within the system on their shop floor, because they don't have other systems to do it. So supplier adoption, when we've done surveys, has usually been quite good, quite high. People are happy with the system. They usually really like the access to the data that they didn't have, the ability to tailor some downloads and grab some of the data so they can upload it into their system as part of an aggregation of all their demand into their planning module. Is usually a big boon for them.
Thanks, John. Satish, another question. Has the collaborative option been used for financials or HR/payroll?
The answer is yes. In fact, one of the most common applications we see is that you have a range of really highly specialized enterprise, ERP or MRP systems running, and then you have the need to integrate with a more current or a corporate financial accounting system. So the answer is yes. For instance, procurement happens on a local level, but then you do pass the financial information back to the accounting systems so that when invoices are processed on a central basis, then that data can actually be processed fairly efficiently, or you have receipt data actually flowing back in. So the answer is yes. The way I really interpret this is you can use this system for integration between, on a B2B basis between multiple businesses, or what we call A2A, which is application-to-application integration. So within the same enterprise, you have two different enterprise applications that can be integrated. So the answer is yes.
Thanks, Satish. Another question, and John and Satish, I'll let the two of you decide who wants to address it. I'm an A&D contractor. In addition to spend controls, we have a lot of regulatory and compliance requirements for our suppliers. How would a system like yours handle this?
As I maintained right at the beginning of the presentation, I let John usually handle the complex questions. So, John, this is yours.
Thanks, Satish. The A&D is an interesting animal in and of itself. One of the things that we wound up building as a result of some of our work in the A&D industry is a thing that we call documents and certificates. This is essentially all of the paperwork that is required for an organization that is somehow or another performing work, generally for the federal government, to maintain compliance with all the various regulations. So a supplier has to have a recent audit. They have to identify whether they're a veteran-owned or minority-owned business. and they're in good standing with the IRS. The documents and certificates process that we built allows a supplier to bring in and say, here's my copy of my audited, my clear findings from my auditors. That's accepted. It becomes a little bit of a collaboration. It becomes accepted by the A&D company. And then there's a time put on it. So it eventually has the same concept as an effectivity date. When it starts getting 2 months out or a month out, it will remind the supplier and the appropriate buyer, if needed, that they need to update this form. When you have that type of information, you get some interesting capabilities. You start being able to look at your spend by veteran-owned suppliers, for example, or this is an election year, you can actually start getting down into what the zip codes and or congressional districts where you're placing your spend. All of this type of data tends to be very important for reporting purposes in the A&D world. So it's an example of the type of thing that we have done in the A&D industry.
Thanks, John. Let's see, Satish, here's another question. What do you see as the impact of cloud-based versus on-premise solutions in the multi-ERP scenario?
That's a great question, and especially in the light of a lot of ongoing industry discussion about cloud-based versus otherwise. Basically, our solutions are available, cloud-based, on-premise, as well as what we like to call the hybrid models. Fundamentally, our customers don't see any technical limitations for any of these models, at least the way we've implemented our solutions, since they essentially gain the same functionality and security in any of these models. In our experience, the type of solution implemented is usually determined by the customer's specific security and access policies, the complexity of workflows and approvals they need, as well as the kind of back-end ERP integration they need. But I would like to say I think basically it really deals with customer security and access policies. In general, I think the larger organizations with more complex environments will likely best benefit from an on-premise or a hybrid model.
Thanks, Satish. Looks like we have time for one more question. Let's see, John, this looks like this is best suited for you. How would a system like this manage the spend with a single supplier across multiple divisions?
Well, there's a couple of ways you can view that or answer that question. One of them would be the notion of if you have multiple divisions with various POs in place that wind up for some reason being at different prices, you can, through workflows, tell the supplier that they need to either adhere to a particular PO for one division, or if you're working off of two varying blanket purchase agreements, that it can force them to use the lower priced one or the one that's currently in place. Another mechanism that you can use is to manage the supplier so they have the ability to control what they can ship in, so you don't wind up having them sending in too much material into one supplier simply because the volume purchase agreement allows for it. So you can start putting caps in on a per division basis of how many they want if you want to split it out, for example. So there's a couple of ways you can do that question. I'm not sure if I answered it completely, but we can certainly follow up with whoever it was after the call.
Thanks, John, and thank you, Satish, as well. This concludes the QA portion of our presentation. Thank you again for your participation. If we were unable to get to your question, John or Satish will contact you directly with a response. Remember, in a few moments, we will be asking a few short survey questions, which will take about a minute to answer and help us to present additional topics of interest to you in the future. If you have any follow-up questions, please feel free to contact us at the information provided on the screen. We look forward to seeing you online or in person again very soon.